What I'd like to talk about is how the cultural context of online and hybrid teaching affects how we think about both technology in terms of accessibility of technology, something like the digital divide, and how new technologies enhance old social relations that are already embedded in cultures. I'm taking the example of American Indians because there's, I think, a very interesting story to be told. So basically, I'm going to be covering the basics of digital divide, the basics of Web 2.0, a little bit about bias and marketization and how images that are forwarded through technology reinforce bias. Then think about some critical technology education and also think about culturally responsive critical pedagogy, especially in the context of online learning. So the first point is that we know there are digital divides, although there's very interesting, I think, work being done on how they're not quite as simple as we thought they were. So the first thing you might look at is someone's ability to access devices and networks. And the next issue you might look at is who is in control of the networks. And we all know that when you're downloading something from the internet and it says, I agree, you blithely agree, probably without reading the 20 pages of the contract, because it's not really an issue that you can get involved in. You don't have any control. If you disagree, you don't get to use the software. So that's something of an issue. Also, we know that there are different ways of using networks to organize, and I think Craig Watkins' work on how young youth of color are using cell phones to do political organizing, especially after Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, it is an interesting way of taking up an older technology to use a form of networking out of that. And we also know that people use networks, maybe not in the ways, for instance, phones were initially meant to be used. So I think about cell phones and organizing agricultural work in various countries in Africa. It's a way to innovate technology use out of something that wasn't meant to be used that way, but works very good for people, for instance, who are doing farming to get reports on the weather and to share information about agriculture. And I also want to look a little bit here, have us look a little bit here about the use of communication and educational technologies to think about how communities can support themselves and grow. And so there are some important implications for thinking about the problems of access to technology being different in different communities. But I also want to say this isn't just an issue of people are terribly oppressed and can't ever do anything innovative to push against that oppression. So I want to also keep a space here for us thinking about the agency of people who don't necessarily have the fullest access to technology but can make use of technology nonetheless. Now, according to the U.S. Census, there are some digital divides that are narrowing. A lot of people now have computers in their homes. They are able to use internet. We also know globally that more people have access to cell phones than they may have to municipal sewer systems. I mean, there's a good reason probably not to just say that so blithely, because I think the other issue is, of course, the reason that people have it is that there's just simply a demand and it is accessible. So some of the old discussions about digital divides may be changing, and you can see from the U.S. Census report in 2012 that there are not that many people left who don't have internet. We're down to about 25% in 2012, and since then there's been a major push in a lot of municipal areas to put in low-cost internet for lower income communities. It's still an issue. I'm about to move to West Virginia. It's certainly still an issue in poor and mountainous areas in the United States, and as you'll see later, it's also an issue in the southwest of the United States, where there are very, very many isolated American Indian reservations who are finding new ways to connect themselves with technologies, including learning how to build towers, which I think is an incredible DIY. One of the new digital divides that I think all of us who are teaching online need to be very careful about is access speed. We're beginning to find, as we take up new software and new platforms, that we're pushing some students out of online technology because they simply can't get to the things that we're offering them anymore. And all of us who work in online learning, who are very fortunate at the University of Illinois to be at a place that is interested in making sure that our computers are updated, find that we're sometimes way ahead of our students in terms of the kind of technology we have. And so we try to do neat things on whatever platform we're using, and we find that our students can't access it because it requires a faster speed than they have. This is probably a divide that we need to be very careful about. And you can even see in some of the cell phone stores, if you go in today, that people are going away from the huge, almost computer phones back to the simpler phones. Not just because Waylon Jennings told them to go back to Lukenbach, Texas, but because there's a little bit of a frustration with always having to keep your technology updated and your expectations begin to rise. It might be better to go back to the simpler things in life. Now, these issues are of particular challenge on tribal lands because you can see a pretty good, I think, example of the kind of digital divide that Native Americans are especially facing. So in 2013, fewer than 10% of homes on tribal lands had broadband connections, compared to 50% African American and Latino homes and 75% of white homes. So we can see there's a very clear issue. And for students, this also means driving long distances because the terrain is it's vast out in many of the areas of tribal lands. And so people have to go to places. And in a way, that's a good thing because you wind up creating almost a hybrid scene for learning. But in another way, it's certainly not as convenient as it is for someone who's teaching online and simply has to go to their computer to begin a class. So there is that issue. There are other issues that are involved in the kind of digital divide that American Indian tribes are facing, and that's that they are very often reliant on either non-compliant towers or the infrastructure there isn't under their control, or companies are coming in and destroying landscapes that are important to the people. And so technology is not necessarily a good, it's something that's actually quite disruptive. And so part of the complication when tribes are trying to negotiate with internet providers or with cell phone providers is how to negotiate both tribal sovereignty, the high cost of development for corporations, and the necessity of also ensuring, as is necessary under the Indian Telecom Training Initiative of 2000, for instance, that the people working on technology also have to be from the tribe. So on the one hand, there are challenges with technology responding to the difference that American Indians bring to that interaction. But on the other hand, this is a new opportunity to assert tribal sovereignty, and it's a new opportunity to see the kind of networks that have been sustaining American Indians for so long changing the ways that they operate. And so part of the story is about difficulty, but another part of the story is a renewed opportunity for tribes to assert sovereignty in this moment of innovation. So some of this is an older issue. I'm not going to read all of the slides here, but I think it's useful to think about the fact that some of the divides that we're talking about in terms of internet technology are actually divides that were not even solved yet in American Indian spaces in terms of telephone accessibility, even in terms of electricity. And part of the difficulty of bringing in new policies and new forms of technology to American Indian tribes is that there is a frustration with the policies that have already been in place and that have failed. And so as tribes are thinking about both how to do programming and how to do education online, they're thinking also about infrastructure development and, as I said before, sovereignty. And their concern is that as they expand access, that no one in the tribe be left out. So even the furthest reaches of where people are living have to be part of that web. So in other words, there is an ethical commitment to ensuring that everyone have equitable technology in a context where already the tribe is subject to not having equitable access to kinds of technology that probably most white Americans take for granted. So it's a new opportunity. And part of the new opportunity allows tribes to improve the training of people in tribes to make the technology their own. And you can see here a lovely logo of Hopi Technologies, Telecommunications Incorporated. It was established, wholly owned by the Hopi tribe. And because it's part of the tribe, then the ways that it engages both in the creation, design, maintenance, and dissemination of technologies are all embedded in cultural practices that would be reflective of Hopi peoples. And I said earlier that technology is not just giving us a substrate to think about relationships, but it is itself a relation. I think when you see the ways that American Indians are negotiating with new forms of technology, that's really abundantly clear, because the social form that is the relationship of the tribe moves the technology. It's not done the other way around. Now, my argument is it never is, but in their case, because they're so consciously aware of the necessity to protect the relationship that is the tribe, that is the motivator. Now, there are diverse locations, of course, for American Indians, and so 2/3 of Native Americans live in cities. You can see the census data from 2010. And so part of I think the very interesting issue in the diaspora of Native Americans away from tribal lands is that the technologies create the opportunity for maintaining connections back to home, but also to have home understand the fact of urban Indians. So I think that recursive relationship is also a very interesting way to keep people better connected than they were before.